4:00, is everyone ready? All right, we will start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon. It is 4 p.m. and I'd like to call the board meeting to order for the Arizona Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. Brittany, could you do roll?
Linda Bove.
Present.
Brittany Buchanan, I am present. Colette Chapman. No? Okay. Lynn Davison.
Here.
Michael Gordon.
I'm here.
Sue K. Kneifel.
Here.
Katie Cienko.
Let me think about it. Physically, yes, I'm present. Mentally, not so much.
That's fair.
Oh, good. Okay, moving on to agenda item 1.02, information item, open meeting law presentation. Deborah Sterling.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me through the mic?
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
Can you hear me through the mic now? No? What should I do?
Get a little closer to the mic.
Is that better? It doesn't matter. Okay.
Keep going.
Is that better? Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Deborah Sterling. I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the Office of the Arizona Attorney General. I'm in the State Government Division, Education and Health. And I've been asked today to talk to you about the open meeting law. I did send a presentation, so you should have something on as a board agenda item. One of the most important things to remember is that the policy of the open meeting law was that it was enacted to ensure that meetings of public bodies be conducted openly and that notices and agendas be provided for such meetings contain information that helps the public to inform the public of what will be discussed or decided. Is that better now? Okay, thank you. Sorry. There are the policy.
Sorry.
Okay. The policy of the open meeting law has two interrelated requirements. One is notices must be posted promptly and with the required information, and the meeting must be conducted openly. Okay, not a problem. Sorry about that. Okay. To whom does the open meeting law apply? All public bodies, except for a very few specific ones that are exempted, and all quasi-judicial bodies, all standing, special, or advisory committees that are appointed by a public body. The open meeting law requires that a public body post an agenda at least 24 hours in advance on their website or in a public building where as part of their notice. And it has to include the time that the public will, if you're having a meeting in public, in person, the open meeting law now requires you post the time that this building will be accessible to the public. That is a new requirement. It actually went into effect like 2 days ago. And you have to make, the other important requirement is you have to make minutes or audio recordings or videos available within 3 days after the meeting. The meeting, in addition to websites, it should be posted publicly someplace physically so that someone can come and look at the physical posting. This presentation will actually focus more on the open meeting law as it pertains to board members. Okay. What is a meeting? This has become more complicated over technology and time. A meeting is commonly defined as a gathering in person or now through technological devices, telephones, emails, video, of a quorum of a public body in which they may discuss, prepare, and take action, and specifically includes a one-way communication by a member of the public that is sent to a quorum and that proposes legal action. So you have to be very careful, particularly, and I'll get into this a little bit later, particularly between emails and phone calls and video conferences. One of my basic recommendations is public business be done at a public meeting. And therefore you have a quorum, everything is appropriately noticed, and there's no issues about whether things were discussed that should not have been at a different time. The important part is the agenda. All discussions must be reasonably related to an adequately described agenda item. So you have to think about how you want to frame the agenda item to be reasonably related to everything you think might want to discuss. A quorum. A quorum is a number of members that is needed to have an official meeting. For the ASDB board, the quorum is in statute. It says the quorum must have 5 members. So in order to have a meeting, you must have 5 members of your board present. And that not all, that varies by board. Sometimes it's in statute, sometimes it's not. But yours is very clear. Now, recusals, and I'll get into that. I got into more in conflict of interest, but recusals do change the quorum. It decreases the number of people that are present for a quorum. So you have to remember that when you're looking at if someone needs to recuse themselves from an order. However, well, in your instance, because the quorum is always 5 members, it doesn't matter how many vacancies you have on your board. Some boards do vary by the number of filled seats on their board, but yours does not. Your statute says 5 members make a quorum, so it does not matter how many vacant seats you might have. You always have to have 5 members of the board to have an open meeting and to take action. And taking action includes discussion. Abstentions, that is, when you're voting, if you decide to abstain because you do not think you should vote or you don't want to vote, that does not affect the quorum. Okay, I'm just going to briefly talk about this again because it's become more of an issue more recently. A quorum can be established.
Excuse me, Ms. Sterling.
Sure.
I apologize for interrupting. This is Linda Bove. Hi, Deborah. I just wanted to interrupt briefly to clarify because I would like to have you state a little bit more clearly for us the difference between abstention and recusal.
Of course.
I do understand that one affects quorum and one does not, but you are talking about different things, correct? Can you clarify that for us, please?
Yes. What a recusal is when you have a statutorily defined conflict of interest, and by statute, you cannot vote on it. An abstention is when you do not have a statutorily required conflict of interest, but you do not want to vote on it.
Okay, and then can you reiterate how each of those affects quorum?
An abstention does not affect quorum because you just abstain, you vote. A recusal does affect quorum because you do not vote at all. Any other questions on that? Okay, please feel free to ask questions as I go along.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, board meetings are held as public sessions. That is, the board must allow the public to attend and the public to listen. And the public is also allowed to videotape, audio tape, and tape record. I guess so few people use that anymore. I forgot to put that in there. But they're allowed to tape it. What they are not allowed unless the board authorizes call to the public comments, they are not allowed to talk at a board meeting. That is, the open meeting law requires that they be able to attend and listen. However, the board is discretionary in whether it wants to allow public comments. And they have some discretion about how they about how they do that, and different boards do it in different ways. Basically, you have to make you have to determine how you want to do your call to the public using reasonableness as the standard. Okay. Because I've seen this on various different agendas, some boards have one call to the public and include anything. Other boards have several calls to the public. Sometimes they do it by a call to the public for agendized items, which actually means the board can discuss the issue because it's on the agenda. If the call to the public is for non-agendized items, the board cannot discuss those items because they are not on the agenda. And some boards do a call to the public after every section, and that really is at your discretion. That really is a policy by the board. Okay, and clarify, the board can make reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on the speakers. So you can set it up. Some boards have a time limit, some boards do not, but it really depends. Again, that's a policy decision by the board. In a call to the public, if it's not an already agendized item, the board cannot take any action except at the end of the call to the public, the board can determine whether it wants to put it on a future agenda item, whether it wants to direct staff or someone else to look at it and come back with it. There is a exception that talks about if the board member is criticized, the board member can respond. I usually recommend that not happen. It's just not well defined, and the best course in my recommendation is that whatever the public member says, just listen to it, and if you want to respond, you can respond at another time, if it's at a different meeting. Okay, board meetings are always public. They always start public. They have to start in the public, and they have to end in the public session. But in between, you're authorized to have executive sessions for certain specified topics. What that means is that you have the board, first of all, has to vote to go into executive session. That is their choice. That's a policy decision whether they go into executive session. There are some executive sessions like confidential records where I don't think it's much of an issue, but there are other issues where boards do split on whether or not they want to go to executive session. In executive session, the public is not invited. They cannot listen. They are not invited to come in. I will go over briefly the executive sessions. They include employment issues, purchase, sale, or lease of real property, pending or contemplated litigation, contract negotiations, confidential records, and added this past legislative session, they added school safety plans and programs and safety of building and critical infrastructures as things you could discuss in executive session. Now, there is one broader executive session that is for legal advice. And because you don't always know, the board doesn't always know whether or not you will need legal advice, you are allowed by the open meeting law to put a notice in your notice section, and the board may request legal advice for any of the agendized items. For the other types of executive sessions, it is always recommended that you specifically note why you're going into executive session for that specific agenda item. If you know you're going into executive session for legal advice, I recommend that you put that in anyway. But you always have to put in for the other types of executive sessions. I want to talk a little bit, and I talked about this briefly a few minutes ago, email and phones. Please, members of the public board must be careful when utilizing emails or phones. You can't use it for discussions that are going to come before the public body. And it's probably it is a good practice not to, if you are using email, not to have reply all to other board members. And I know I've seen this. We do have language that you put on emails because you may unintentionally create a quorum. And a quorum can be created if person A talks to person B, then person B talks to person C, conveying also person A's conversation, and you get up to 5. You can get up to 5 pretty quickly. So while it's easy to use email, it's become much more of an issue the last 10, 15 years, and you can appropriately use email for communication. Just ensure you don't inadvertently create a quorum, because that would be an open meeting law violation, and you don't start a discussion. It's to convey essentially information. It's not to start a discussion. Discussions are to be done at public meetings, in public sessions, or executive session if appropriate. Okay, in that vein, the other thing is make sure when you do discussions that they don't, if you're discussing something, think about whether or not it reasonably will lead to a board matter. Because that becomes very important when you sometimes maybe inadvertently end up with a quorum or end up having a phone call. They call it a phone, it used to be called a phone tree, now it's more likely an email stream. But it's particularly troublesome if it's something that's likely to come before the board, because that should be done at a public meeting. And these public meetings do not have to be created at the same time. Unlike a public meeting like today, where everybody's here at the same time, and you know when it starts and you know when it ends, if you inadvertently create a public meeting by email, and sometimes phone calls, and most likely these days emails, it doesn't have to be simultaneous. You can track emails, as we know, and if you end up talking to a quorum or doing other things that are not appropriate as leading a discussion, then you're looking at potential violations of the open meeting law. One of the things that is important is that if you do inadvertently violate an open meeting law during one of your discussions or one of your votes, essentially that decision becomes null and void. Now, there are 2 ways to handle that. If the date of the decision is important, that is, you had to decide it at this meeting, you go through a process called ratification of that. If you simply need to decide it at the next meeting or future meeting, you can do that too. Ratification is a complicated issue. I wasn't going to get into it here, but if it ever happens, I'll certainly be glad to assist. But there is a specific procedure if that happens. Enforcement of the open meeting law. The open meeting law is generally enforced by the Attorney General's office, my office. There's an open meeting law enforcement team, or by the county office in which the violation occurred. The Attorney General or county attorney will initiate an investigation, may resolve the issue, or actually file a lawsuit where the public body usually meets. If it goes to a lawsuit, the court may impose penalties, and the board may not expend public monies to employ or retain legal counsel to the board or any of its officers at any legal action pursuant to this unless otherwise authorized to make such an expenditure. I think if there's no further questions, I did on the outline put 2 additional related. The open meeting law is the Arizona Attorney General's office has on its website Arizona Attorney General Handbook, and it has a section on open meeting. The Ombudsman has a section. Ombudsman has published booklets both on open meeting law and actually on public records, and usually those are the ones that I often refer to. They are very recent. They're done in 2023. They include the Attorney General's chapter, they include the statute itself, and they include very useful and helpful questions and answers. Related issues, as I've sort of skirted around here, is conflict of interest and public records. Does anybody have any questions?
You hear me?
Yes.
Just a question where you said that you cannot have meetings with less than a majority of the public body meeting with individual members. So, like,
Okay.
two of us
Yeah.
can't
It's-
talk, or?
Yes, yeah. Okay. You can't have a public meeting, and in your case, it's 5 board members. You can meet with less than a quorum, as long as you're careful about that it does not expand to a quorum. I mean, my blanket advice is just do public business at public meetings. However, I do recognize that that may not always be the practical way. So if you have to do it, if you want to do it, one-on-ones, many boards do that. Just be careful that it does not expand to meet the quorum.
Thank you.
Anything else I can help you with?
Any other comments or questions for Deborah? Thank you so much. I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 1.03, call to the public for agendized items.
I don't think my mic is working. I have one agenda, one public comment, and it's from Joe Malinka.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendents Kachov and Cooper, and Board of Directors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I would like to discuss policy GBEBA, access to communication. I have been a staff interpreter at ASDB for 15 years. I had the honor and privilege to be a part of the committee who worked tirelessly and passionately to develop this policy. We were hoping to submit it to you back in July, but we had a few encounters that we had to resolve, and we are here now. I hope that you will read and consider this policy and think about the staff here at ASDB. Think about their experiences, what they encounter as they try to access this environment. They should have an environment that is open to them with no restrictions. I am incredibly proud of the work that this committee has done. And I hope that you will read it and approve it. I do understand that this is a first read. If you wanted to rush it through, I mean, of course, that's up to you. And again, I thank you for your time and consideration. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
No other comments.
With no other public comments, we will move on to agenda item 1.04, the superintendent's report. Superintendent Reichman.
Good afternoon, President Kneifel, members of our board, Acting Assistant Superintendent Kachoff, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, and our ASDB community. Welcome to our November 2nd, 2023 board meeting. November. It's already started the official start of our 2023 holiday season, right? We're all getting to become very busy, getting ready for holidays such as Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and all the other holidays. My presentation this afternoon follows a theme centered on effective communication and transparency. I'm going to start us off with a story. I feel like I haven't done that in a while. I found a story that was interesting, a little bit humorous, but also shows an analogy of the problems and considerations when we think about effective communication and transparency. I read an article about a man last year who was going to Indonesia. He was to be providing a training and a workshop there, finished, and then was ready to come back home to the U.S. He was at the airport and saw that the plane was on the runway. He was excited that it would be on time. It looked like it was going to be ready to take off. He sat with the other passengers, boarded the airplane, and when he sat down, he began to relax and fell asleep. Fell asleep for a while, then woke up because he heard some yelling. And he wondered, what's happening? He took a look around and realized that the plane had not yet taken off. He looked at the time, and it was 45 minutes past takeoff time. He didn't know what was going on. The other passengers began to get irate, wondering what was wrong, what was happening, and they were beginning to yell at the flight attendants. The flight attendants were trying to de-escalate the passengers and calm them down, assuring them that everything was okay, but there was a little bit of a delay, but they would surely soon take off. So please remain in your seats, keep your seatbelts off. And of course, they did not listen to the flight attendants. They got up, started to move about the cabin, and then they heard the captain make an announcement saying, "Sorry, folks, we have had a little bit of a medical emergency over here. We're taking care of it. Once that is resolved, we will take off." That information did not calm anybody. Everybody became even more upset, with one woman even saying, "There's a COVID outbreak on this plane. Get me out of here right now." Sure enough, that woman disembarked with her luggage, and some other passengers did as well. A little bit later, the captain made another announcement saying that that medical emergency had been resolved and that they were ready for takeoff. And they took off. I'll give you a second to think about that. What was worse, no information or some information? I'm not sure, but at first, no information caused a lot of angst, anxiety, anger. People didn't like being in the dark. And then, when you only provide some information, people start to add on other information. It then becomes their reality. And that is a great analogy when we think about effective communication and transparency, which is what I wanted to talk about this afternoon. is our efforts to improve our communication and our transparency. We know that effective communication and transparency is critical to our agency's culture, to our relationships that we have with the community. Just look at our operating principles: accountability, collaboration, and transparency. That transparency component is probably one of the more difficult things for us. And then when we look at our board's strategic plan, the very first pillar is effective communication and relationships. With those two together, we have to think about how can we become effective communicators and become more transparent. For me as superintendent, that has been one of the most challenging parts of my job. How we effectively communicate with the agency, with the board, with the community. How can we be transparent about agency decisions? With that, last spring, as you all are aware, Miss Donna Williams, our agency ombudsperson, did a series of focus groups. There were 11 of them in total, focusing on communication. And she collected a lot of information and feedback. And with that, she gave us 4 recommendations. The first recommendation was to develop an internal communication strategy. The second recommendation was to create meaningful opportunities for staff to provide feedback. The third was to provide more information and access to you, the board, for our staff. And the fourth is that me, as superintendent, and our 2 assistant superintendents become more visible. We have been working on all 4. Just so happens that last February, before those focus groups, we had a steering committee meeting. That steering committee is comprised of 50 to 70 leaders from across the agency. They met together to talk about different topics, but at this particular steering committee meeting, I asked them, what do we need to do to improve our communication? What specifically can I do better? And they provided great feedback. We had 7 action items. One example, you know that after each board meeting, I write a summary. I tell everybody what happened throughout the agency, what has been happening at the board meeting in a summary. And I've been doing that thus far. I'm trying to keep my commitments to improve my communications with the agency. So that's the first recommendation from Donna. The second is to make meaningful opportunities for our staff and the community as well to provide feedback. We just did 3 town halls. Those town halls were focusing on the different qualities for our NES assistant superintendent. Those 3 town halls were held October 10th, 17th, and 24th. The first in Phoenix, Tucson, and virtual. We had a total of 34 participants, and we took detailed notes at each town hall that we have put into a summary. We received feedback from the community about the assistant superintendent's qualities. That information has been brought to the steering committee. We met for the first time in person this past Monday. It's the first time that we were able to meet in person since the fall of 2019. This has all been online, and I am so relieved to be back in person. We had 50 people in the room together talking about, again, some different actions on how and what we can do to improve communications. And not just me or our assistant superintendents, but how all of our leaders here within our agency can improve communication. I asked them to rank which of their action items were the most important that we could focus on to improve communication. We have that information today. It is now being compiled and will be developed into our internal communication strategy. We will use that as a guide for specific actions that all of us can take responsibility for effective communication. So, during that steering committee, we also provided information about the master facility plan. If you can remember at the last board meeting, our Director of Operations, Albert Duff, provided an informational session about the master facilities plan. He again presented to the leaders within the agency, and we opened it up to feedback. We want to hear from them about what needs to be included and thought through with the master facilities plan. We also talked about the Office of Civil Rights resolution agreement that we are currently in with OCR and some of the work that we've been doing as pertains to that. We shared that information with the agency leadership and got some feedback about some outstanding confusion and how we can make some better decisions moving forward. So we have that. Third, information about and access to the board. We have begun that process. My last vlog to the agency focused on our board. I talked about the state constitution, the state laws, what they say about what kind of representation is on the board, what the governor does to appoint and select people on the board, and then your roles and responsibility as the governing agency of ASDB is to make and establish policies, to evaluate programs, evaluate me as the superintendent, and so on. We will continue to provide that information to our agency and community about the work that you do and who you are. So that's number 3 checked off. Number 4, visibility. October was the jackpot. I was incredibly busy and more visible than I think I've ever been since 2019. The first week of October, I flew to Kentucky for COSB conference, the Council of School Administrators for the Blind. That's a national level conference that I attended. They told me that I had disappeared, and that's true. I had disappeared for about 4 years, but my presence was felt that week. Later, I went to Rochester, New York to NTID for the National Advisory Group meeting. I was there for that. And then we had our 3 town halls in October. We had the board work study session. We met with some of our teachers who are members of the ASDB Educational Association. And then I went to the Arizona Association of the Deaf conference, which was all day, and saw some of you there. Some of us from ASDB were there, And I didn't coordinate any of it. I just showed up and bumped into Jill Voigt and bumped into Paul Saunders, our two principals for our sites. Found out that Jill brought 6 or 7 students from PDSD, high school students. There were several other staff members. I think Sarah was there. I'm not gonna name all of the names, but we were well represented at the Arizona Association for the Deaf conference. It was very neat that that happened. Like I said, the town hall's in October, and then at the very end of October, just 2 days ago, was Halloween. And I was in Tucson meeting 2 state legislators. They came to tour the Tucson campus. And that was Arizona State Senator Gowan and Arizona State Representative Cook. They have an interest in our master facilities plan, and they wanted to tour the Tucson campus. That gave us an opportunity to discuss with the 2 of them about what it is that we need to do with our master facility and our capital renewal of our Tucson campus. But while we were there, of course, we had to introduce them to our students who were wearing their costumes. We brought them to the cafeteria. All of our students had costumes on, and so they were passing out candy and interacting with our students there. It just so happened that our principal was dressed up in costume, and his 2 assistant principals were matching. They had Snow White themed costumes. It was very cool. We had a lot of fun on Halloween. It was a great opportunity for the state legislators to become connected with our students and to see who we are educating and serving on the Tucson campus. It was phenomenal. So again, visibility. October just so happened to be the perfect month. So, we know that it is critical to have effective communication and transparency. We understand that for all of us, that sense of stability and connectedness, we can only get that when we have effective communication and transparency. So to have that stability and connectedness, that will improve our agency's culture and climate. I want to try to quote Stephen Covey. He talks about trust. Trust is the glue in life. It is essential. It's an essential ingredient in effective communication. It is also the fundamental principle that holds together all of our relationships. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the board?
I have a comment. I just like that quote a lot, Superintendent Reichman.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other comments or questions, we'll move on to agenda item 1.05, information item from Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction. Your report, Oren.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, Board President Kneifel, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, and the ASDB community. For my report, I want to focus on 3 things. The first being about eating frogs, the second about our itinerant programs, and the third about our new SPED director and the duties under the new SPED director. So let's start with talking about eating frogs. In 2017, Brian Tracy wrote a book titled Eat That Frog. And I do want to thank Marilyn Brooks, an ASDB itinerant teacher, for sharing that book with me. The basic premise of that book is that it is important to tackle your most challenging tasks first, and to not procrastinate on the parts of your work that might be hard or painful. So his analogy is that if you hurry up and eat that frog, aka take care of the most difficult tasks, then the rest of your day, week, or year will have nowhere to go but up. So we're currently eating some frogs. A current frog that we're eating is the fallout from our teacher shortage, both in the day schools and our itinerant programs. Today I'm going to focus just on the itinerant programs. So about 36 years ago, ASDB started its itinerant program. Since then, the itinerant programs has grown and currently makes up over half of the total number of students that ASDB serves. So again, over half the students we serve are in the itinerant programs. In comparison, our Birth to 3 program makes up about 25% of the students, and our 2 day schools and the preschools make up a little under the final 25%. Due to our teacher shortage, we have had to stop accepting new districts as itinerant partners and are focusing on just serving the current contracted districts that we have. Each of these conversations is a frog. And we currently have about 8 districts who want to partner with us and are currently on a waiting list. Also in Region 2, we've had to share with many SPED directors that based on our shortages, what we can provide their students, we might be able to meet all the minutes, and in some cases, we might not be able to. We have started a minute tracker, so we are fully aware of what's happening and are being transparent with our SPED directors as to what's going on. Again, these conversations have been eating frogs. And I do want to say I appreciate everyone's professionalism during these hard conversations. We appreciate all the brainstorming sessions that we're having with our partnering districts to try and navigate these issues. I do need to commend Rosetta Hicks, the director of Region 2, as well as her staff, especially Pam Kelk and Morgan Stenson, on how they are handling these tough conversations. Rosie and her team are showing up prepared with a lot of information on every single student to discuss what this shortage means in regards to what we can do now and what it might look like in the future. I also want to commend how Jason Lilly, the director of Region 3, and Greer Parrish, the director of Region 1, have collaborated with Rosie to see how their staff can assist with some of the teacher shortages that we're seeing here in Maricopa County. This year, these 3 directors have been functioning as a team, and I really couldn't be prouder of all 3 of them. I also want to commend Sarah Satilli, our new SPED director, on the work that she's been tackling since starting at ASDB this summer. Her welcome to ASDB was pretty much us saying, welcome to ASDB, here are 2 gigantic frogs that you need to eat. These 2 really big frogs were our student health center on the Tucson campus, and the second one was trying to create consistency in our IEP processes, which includes trying to find consistency between both campuses as far as referrals to the day schools, consistencies in how we run IEP meetings, and consistency in the roles of related service providers in these meetings. The Student Health Center in Tucson had major turnover this summer, and Sarah was handed over a situation where we didn't even know if we would have a functioning health center for the first day of school. Due to her hard work, the Tucson Health Center was ready for the first day, and she continues to work with staffing challenges to ensure that we have a program there that meets all of our students' needs. In regards to the IEP processes, ASDB has never had a district SPED director before, or at least as far as I know. This means that Sarah's had to start with simple things like creating IEP norms, to harder things like having discussions as to how do we work with students who have very complex needs and do it consistently. So again, I want to thank Sarah. I want to thank everybody at the Tucson campus who came up and was transparent about the needs that we had for the Student Health Center. I want to thank our IEP specialists. We have one in the ELP, Maureen Galucci, and there are two at the campuses, Kim Akins and Abby Wagner, for helping us eat these frogs as we move forward to create a more productive tomorrow. So as we enter the last months of 2023, I've been focusing my efforts on how we strengthen communication and systems between the various parts of the educational side of the agency. I am trying to include the principals and the directors in more meetings and provide opportunities for them to be collaborative. And hopefully this will lead to having a true team that I can proudly turn over to whoever replaces me in July. So in conclusion, the phrase, "the whole is greater than the sum of its parts," is loosely attributed to Aristotle. As I continue to have a greater understanding of each part of the agency and the great people working within those parts, the more excited I get about the endless possibilities of this agency as we continue to get the parts to work together as a whole. I do believe that as the staff, leadership, and this board continue to work together, the next few years can lead to something special and historical for this agency. Thank you.
Any questions? I do have one, Oren. In regards to the minute tracking, how does that impact, I'm just going to be direct about this, revenues from those contracted schools?
So that is a complex question. Rosie and her team did look at every single student, looked at who we're getting the voucher for, the different levels of the voucher, the fee for service, and the different levels of fee for service, and tried to do the best possible to where it does not affect revenue. Okay. Again, by doing the minute tracking, we are kind of minute by minute seeing where we are, and again, being transparent with everybody. So, it's relatively new. We're only a couple months in. But right now, I think it would be, I'm hesitant to say how it's going to affect revenue, because at this point, I think it is kind of waiting to see. Where it will affect future revenue is we can't, with our current teachers we have, we cannot continue to expand and get new districts. We can't. We lost a lot of teachers last year, and the refrain was kind of the same, as they were being overworked and the minutes were too high. So,
and thank you. I would agree with that. I think we need to make sure that we're maintaining high quality staff and not burning them at the candle at both ends, so to speak. So I appreciate that feedback. Any thoughts on how how are you determining whether or not, so if we have a current contract, how are you determining whether or not you can take in another student from that contract? I understand not creating new contracts, but if we're in a contract, how do you make sure that we can serve equitably, I guess is the word I'm looking for?
So for every teacher that we have in the itinerant setting, we do have their caseloads and their minutes. We include their travel time and their prep time. So depending on where they are in the valley, the number of hours in the day and the students they have, then it really is up to the director and their team to decide, can we take on another student, or is it just not going to happen?
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate that. Any other questions? Okay. Moving on, agenda item 1.06, Assistant Superintendent of Agency Operations and Support Services report. Assistant Superintendent Cooper.
Good afternoon, Board President Kneifel, Superintendent Reichman, Acting Assistant Superintendent Katchoff, members of the board, ASDB community, and staff members. Each of the directors have provided to you their departmental reports as an opportunity to communicate on how we are effectively utilizing our resources and ensuring our systems are in place to support the learning, teaching, as well as the agency operations. The Information Technology Department continues to work on numerous activities, enhancing our technical infrastructure and supporting staff with their various needs of setting up equipment and electronic devices. As the transportation team continues to monitor the utilization and overall health of the agency fleet, we will be ordering 8 more SUVs this year to replace the fleet's older sedans using the annual special line item funding that we have of $369,000. You continuously hear about the designs of the master facility plan. As you're aware, they have already started. Site walkthroughs with the mechanical, plumbing, and electrical engineering teams for both campuses have been completed, as well as a stakeholder survey was completed where we received 104 responses, which has revealed a lot to Albert as our Director of Operations, as well as to the rest of the agency, on how important it is to our teachers and students and how we can operate and support everyone within our campuses. While we prepare for the master facility plan renovations, we continue to seek funding from the state, which includes building renewal funds. This year, ASDB was awarded over $2.7 million this year. These funds will be used to replace carpets in various areas on both campuses, replace old air conditioning units on the Tucson campus, upgrade electrical for the Tucson campus elementary building, install new energy management systems on both campuses to reduce our carbon footprint and conserve energy, as well as replacing the SPAC dome here on the Phoenix campus. For business services, the budget and financial report for September 23 and 2022 will be provided separately under agenda item 4.01. And all in all, the team continues to work hard, making sure that we're purchasing goods and services, receiving and delivering ordered items, as well as processing vendor payments, travel claims, and payroll for staff. We have not yet received an update from the State Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting yet on the 2025 budget package, which we submitted various funding issues in September. And to ensure that our budgetary needs are being met for this fiscal year, the team continues to monitor our budgets to actuals frequently, especially considering the costs we continue to incur for contracted transportation and nursing services, in which our vendor rates have increased in comparison to last year, primarily due to inflation. We have also been recently informed, effective with the November 1st preschool services contract renewal with the Foundation for Blind Children, they are requesting an increase in their rates for transportation by about 10%, nursing services by 87%, and psychologist evaluations by 13%. FBC have indicated these rate adjustments are due primarily to an increased demand for nursing and transportation services, provider shortages, as well as economic factors. We have not yet had an opportunity to thoroughly review and discuss the requests with FBC or the State Procurement Office, so we will be requesting an extension. The media team has several projects that they have been working on, which includes updating the agency website, creating new agency brochures with updated program information, content, and graphics, as well as creating a Braille request system to better process our Braille requests. They also worked with the superintendent on the town hall meetings, creating an ASD policy complaint portal that includes applicable web forms and routing to ensure that they are fully accessible. The human resources team, along with the media team, is actively addressing the ongoing recruitment and retention challenges that we continue to face. Salary increase recommendations and/or salary schedule adjustments are still being identified and will be brought to the board in January for approval. Last but not least, today, included in the consent agenda item 6.01 is the approval of several salary schedule updates to address the minimum wage increase. Effective January 1st, the state of Arizona minimum wage will increase from $13.85 to $14.35. We're requesting approval to adjust the noted salary schedules by 75 cents, which will bring the starting rate to $14.75 from the current rate of $14. So we are above the minimum wage. As a reminder, and as an agency under the state, we are not required to follow the minimum wage increase. However, we try to do so whenever possible to ensure we remain competitive with other employers. And if approved, effective January 6, all staff members on the classified salary schedule will receive the 75 increase for grades 1 through 22, except any staff member that is making over $100,000 per year annually will not be receiving the increase. To ensure efficient and effective management of our resources, it is my ongoing commitment to ensure that I provide transparent communication to all stakeholders that impact our students, staff, and families. And that really wraps up my report for the evening.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'm moving on to 2.01, action item, approval of the consent agenda consistent with board policy to include items 5.01, 6.01, 6.02, and an omission, which it'll also include 7.02.
One moment, please. 7.01, is that on there as well?
7.02, not 7.01.
Oh, 2, okay. Okay. So can you please repeat that?
Sure. That's just the agenda item. I would need to have a motion to approve the consent agenda items to include 5.01, 6.01, and 6.02, and 7.02.
Okay.
Do I have a motion? Oh, or do you have a question, Linda?
Yes, this is Linda Bove. I do have a question. Can we hold on 7.02? I'd like to hear a bit more information about that one from Maria Murphy.
So
You
I-
mentioned 7.02 included in the consent agenda, and I'm wondering,
It's supposed to
Why?
be, if you look at the agenda, it is listed as a consent agenda item. It just wasn't placed under 2.01. If you look at the agenda item, it is labeled a consent agenda item. It was just omitted under 2.01.
If I may add, I can see why Ms. Bove is confused, because when we review this, it shows 5.01, 6.02, and 6.03. There's nothing saying 7.02 in that section.
Right, under 2.01.
It is
But if you
confusing.
look at 7.01, or 7.02, it is listed as a consent agenda item. So I will
I see what you mean.
entertain a motion to hold on 7.02 if you want to make a motion including everything other than 7.02 so we can move forward with those. I'm fine with that.
I will make a motion to hold 7.02 so that the board can have a little bit more time to review that.
Can you rephrase your motion to approve the consent agenda items that we are looking at?
Sure. I would like to move forward with a motion to approve 5.01, 6.01, and 6.02, and to hold on 7.02 for further discussion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposition? Motion carries for consent agenda items 5.01, 6.01, and 6.02. I'd like to stay in 2.01, and Maria Murphy, could you maybe come up and talk about 7.02 so that we could move forward on this if possible?
Certainly. Good afternoon, board members, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendents, members of the public. You have before you the policies in Agenda Item 7.02, policies GCKA and GDFA. They were brought for a first read at the September board meeting. No questions or concerns at that time. I have not received any additional questions or concerns in regards to those policies. So we're just seeking to approve.
Maria, just for clarification, for GCKA, is that recommended language from either statute or from ASBA?
This was actually requested language from internal staff to make sure that we are being consistent with other state agencies. They're no longer using the term telecommuting, they're using the term remote work.
And then for policy, I believe I asked you a question on GDFA. That's being stricken because we have a duplicate policy, is that correct?
That is correct. It was causing confusion, and in consultation with Director Pyatt, we determined that it would really just make more sense to have one policy.
Any other questions?
no,
Okay.
you asked the questions I was going to ask, so I have my answers. Thank you.
Okay, I would still entertain a,
I move to approve 702? 7.02.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Moving on to 4.01, information item, finance report. Kimberly Bittridge, Director of Business Services.
afternoon, Board President Kneifel, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, Assistant Superintendent Chakchop, and members of the board and ASDB community. You have been provided our most recent board report that covers the financial data for September 2022 and September 2023. This data was covered in more detail at our most recent Finance Committee meeting that was held last Thursday, October 26th, with Board President Kneifel and Board Member Mike Gordon. Also in attendance were Superintendent Reichman and Assistant Superintendent Cooper and former Board Member P.V. Jones. The total student count report provided in the board report is for July 1st, 2023. ASDB has transitioned to a new student information system, Synergy, from the old system, PowerSchool. There have been delays with getting the students' input, with staff learning the new system, and new registrars to ASDB learning the process. As of October 1st, we had about 491 FTE, which includes 8.5 FTE at FBC. At that time, we employed 713 staff. Only 154 are full-time with 1.0 FTE. There were currently 183 vacancies across the agency. The highlight of the September 23 financial report shows the collected revenue of $630,000 was $370,000 lower than September 2022 revenue of $1.0 million. The major difference is the decrease in receipt of the institutional voucher because of the implementation of the new student information system, and a decrease in the classroom site fund due to a delay in receiving September's distribution. The budget fiscal year 2023 obligated expenses of $14.7 million were $0.7 million lower than budget fiscal year 2022. Obligated expenses of $15.4 million. The decrease is primarily due to a decrease in equipment expenditures. In budget fiscal year 2022, we purchased the Chromebooks for the students and installed the notification system. Our ending cash balance is $2.5 million higher than it was at this time last year. The main increases are the classroom site fund of $1.6 million and the cooperative services fund of $2.1 million, offset by a reduction in the federal grants fund of $889,000. If there are no questions of the information presented, this concludes my board report.
Any questions from the board?
This was just a comment to the interpreters to please not use acronyms because I'm not in the school system, and so I don't know the acronyms. So please be respectful of the deaf members of the board and refrain from using acronyms in your interpretation.
No questions for Kim? Hearing none, we'll move
Thank
on
you.
to 6.03, information and discussion item, the grievance pursuant to ASDB policy and an Arizona EEOC complaint and a notice of claim filed by Dr. George Martin against ASDB and Superintendent Reichman. Pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A3, the board may vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public, for discussion and consultation for legal advice with the board's attorney as it relates to this item.
So can we make a motion for executive session?
Yes, we can make a motion for executive session.
So moved. I move that we go into executive session.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
We will adjourn to executive session at 5:14 p.m. I don't, what are we going over to? I don't have a date. Okay, all right, we are adjourning for executive session. For legal advice with the board's attorneys for pending or contemplated potential litigation. Now we will adjourn to executive session. Thank you. I try. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Monroe saying you have to vote.
Oh, all right. I will. Could we move again to, yes.
Yes, I move to go into executive session on the agenda items, 6.03? Was it 6.03? Thank you, Lynn. Yes, 6.03.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Now we will adjourn to executive session. We'll get this right. Thought it was an implication. That's why.
Go ahead, Miss Wendy. What's that?
Okay. Yeah, just put in agenda items 602, more explained by Mr. Martin or something to that effect. I don't ever write more than 2 sentences, just so you know.
Media will be set when Sue is ready.
You don't have to put anything here. Only read here and then just that. You're good. That's good? Okay. Yep. And that has to go in the envelope in the back, probably to Debbie, to the Zongo. Okay.
There she is. I was. I don't know if anyone else was in them, but I was. You're welcome.
Just waiting for Lynn to come back. We don't have any requests to the public for non-agenda items. Will you count it down, or should we just begin?
Media, are you all set? Aaron? Okay. We'll go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back, everybody. We will resume with agenda item 7.01, information and discussion item, introduction and possible discussion of policies DB, GBEBA, IHBAB, and IHBD. Maria Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations.
Good evening, Board Member Kneifel, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendents, staff, and members of the public. You have before you the red lines for the above-mentioned policies. They were posted to the public. We have not received any questions or public comment. And at this time, I would just like to make myself available for any questions or discussion that you may have.
3. This is Suke. I'm just wondering, with DB, does that just, the changes just indicate the governance of the agency more accurately?
Yes, that is correct, and that is in response to one of the findings from the Office of the Auditor General's report.
And then GBEBA, is that a brand new policy?
Yes, Yes, it is.
I'm going to follow up with IHBAB. Is that in regards to the finding that we received?
That is actually not in response to the finding that we received, and in consultation with our council and with Superintendent Reichman, we've determined that that policy is going to need a little bit more attention and a little bit more work. So we had this discussion after the policies were already posted.
Excuse me. Suke, can you please repeat which policy you were just talking about?
Yes, that would have been IHBAB. So we'll see another draft of this?
We may be seeing another draft.
Okay.
No decision has been made at this time.
And then I'm just assuming that this is an updated IHBD.
So, yes, Board Member Kneifel, IHBD actually was a part of the ASDB policy manual prior to the decision that ADE made regarding us being an institution. And when we became an institution, it was not appropriate for us to have this policy in our manual anymore, so it was removed. But now that we are a local educational agency again, it's appropriate to place this back into the policy manual. So that's why that is here.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Maria?
This is Linda. Just give me a moment. I'd like to look back. I would like to mention GBEBA. Have we talked about that already? I'm a little bit behind.
We kind of looked at it. It's a brand new policy. If you have questions or comments, please go ahead now.
I do have a question. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the committee that worked so hard on this policy. I know that it is a brand new policy regarding access to communication, and I read through it and I found it very impressive. There were a couple of things that I'm curious about, but I think since this is a first read for us, I would just like to say thank you to the people that were on that committee, and I applaud your work. I would like to ask Superintendent Reichman a question about the new person who was just hired, Dr. B, I'm so sorry, I'm bad with names, who is going to be the new ASL administrator. That individual, I believe, is going to start working with the agency in January 2024. Is that correct? Superintendent Reichman, would you please give us that name? I'm bad with names. Dr. Marla?
Boez, B-O-E-Z, I believe the last name is. The first name is escaping.
First name is Marla, I believe. Marla?
Yes, that is correct.
I did remember her first name. So is it correct that she's a new member of the agency to be starting in January of 2024? I would like, if possible, to have her review that policy. I would like to have her eyes on it and see what questions or comments she might have about it. Does that make sense?
Sure, that is possible. That is something we could do. That would then mean this would be postponed from to discuss this not in January, but in March for a final approval.
Correct. I would like to see that happen. I would like to know what her feedback will be, and that might help us to fine-tune it and make sure that we are all happy with any revisions that need to be made, et cetera, before it's approved. So that's
Okay.
what I wanted to get at. I guess that was the point of my question. So.
That's a fair point.
Okay, so do I need to do anything more then, Suke? Not at the moment?
Nope, not at the moment. If there,
This is Commissioner Sanko. I have.
This is Oren. Mike has confirmed for me that Marla Borowitz, if I'm saying that correctly, has seen it and has been involved, so that's already taken place.
Oh, that's great. I wasn't aware of that. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Very good. Thank you. Katie had a comment?
Well, I guess Oren actually answered my question. I was planning to ask after it was reviewed. Could I borrow that paper? Let's see. I thought everything looked good, but there was one thing that gave me a little bit of pause. I was taken aback by this one piece. It uses the term SIMCOM, or simultaneous communication. That threw me off a little bit. I went to a school for the deaf, and I graduated from Gallaudet, and we were a very ASL-centric school. So I was planning to ask if you had already received feedback from deaf staff regarding this piece. I was wondering just about what that perspective was on this piece.
This is Linda. I had a similar question to what Katie said, because simultaneous communication is a thing of the past. There is research to indicate that it is not effective. One language or the other will suffer when simultaneous communication is used, so I was surprised to see it there.
And to reinforce what Linda was saying, SIMCOM, or total communication, is a tool. Pardon the interpreter. It is a tool. It is not a language. It's code switching sometimes is necessary when you're signing more than speaking, or some people will speak more than they're signing. But either way, that will impact the deaf or hard of hearing students. Acquisition of a full language and their access to information. So, for example, when we graduated from the School for the Deaf, the model did focus on total communication, which is SIMCOM, and for some students, it was fine, but it didn't succeed for other students, and those of us who it did work for were lucky. When we went to Gallaudet and were immersed in a full language and culture, that brought us to where we are today. So it's very important to just be mindful of that. I would like to see deaf and hard of hearing staff sharing their perspectives on that piece.
And this is Linda. With that in mind, I do have a suggestion that we hold this to find out why that component, simultaneous communication, is in this policy.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that question. So simultaneous communication is there as part of a definition for people to understand, people who are not ASL fluent to understand what simultaneous communication is. And then also in there, it is noted that if if a staff member is not fluent in sign language, you should always try to get an interpreter. However, sometimes there may be occasional times when an interpreter might not be available, and so SIMCOM might be an option, but it does specifically state in the policy that it's only supposed to be used as a last resort in an unplanned, spontaneous, and momentary communication. So it is not to become the default. It's only supposed to be spontaneous and momentary, and only when there are no other options that are available.
Maria, can I've had a conversation with Maria about this. I asked very similar questions. And I think what we need to look at this is really talking about making sure that there is equivalent access to everything that's going on campus. So again, if someone is needing to have a private conversation, instead of putting down their hands and starting to speak, they need to move to another room and be in private to have that conversation. we want to make sure that deaf and hard of hearing kids on campuses or wherever the ASDB staff are have the same access to what is going on around them as a hearing student in their classroom always would have. So if there are two teachers talking and walking down a hallway in a general education school that other people can overhear, that access needs to be afforded to the deaf and hard of hearing kids. So I think that is the intent, from my understanding, of the policy in general. I don't think, and maybe some of the committee member could speak to this as well, I don't think the intent is to rely on simultaneous communication, because again, as Katie said, it is not a language. But maybe some of the committee might want to
Maria, before we move forward, Maria, thank you. I just want to say that you did a great job writing this. It's beautiful. It's beautiful work. You all did great. There is just one line that might be considered revising, where it says, it's number 1. Here at the bottom it says, ASDB is committed to American Sign Language, ASL and English access for staff. ASL and English are recognized as two distinct languages in their own right, with equal respect, and simultaneous communication, or SIMCON, is generally is a communication strategy for non-ASL fluent individuals. And I think that phrasing is a little bit, it doesn't work. I think it's a bit misleading to say if an interpreter is not available, or if in Arizona and also nationally we're experiencing an interpreter shortage. So it's not fair to students to say there's not an interpreter available. How are the students going to get access to information if there is not an interpreter available? Resorting to SIMCOM as a last resort might be impacting students' ability to learn. So that's just one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, that last statement. Overall, reading the entire policy, it's wonderful. You've created, you've covered all of the bases, SIMCOM, communication, everything. It's just that one phrasing that bothers me. But other than that, it's beautiful work.
Thank you, Board Member Cienko. And what I was trying to get across in the policy is to state that SIMCOM is a non-preferred communication approach. It's not something that we should be using on a regular basis, because there are difficulties in trying to do both at the same time. And that's what I was trying to get across, and that's why I was saying, here are all of the other alternatives. You always want to try to get an interpreter. If an interpreter is not available, use SIMCOM only in the moment, in passing, as a last resort. Because ASL or English is these are the preferred communication modalities. And maybe I didn't express that well.
No, I understand.
Did the committee?
I appreciate that effort. Thank you.
Thank
Maria,
you.
did either of the committee members want to add to that?
Please.
Yes, I would like to hear from them, particularly deaf committee members, the deaf individual, please. Yes, this is Mike Olivier. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. I would like to clarify a little bit of background. Again, my name is Mike Olivier. This is how you sign my name. I am the director of ODD for ASDB, and I am one of the leads for this particular committee in creating this policy. It has been a 2-year process. We already have a policy for instruction, IHBAA, and that was a good starting place, but we did not have a policy for staff in general. And so we worked very hard over a long period of time, and I'm glad that you brought this up, and I'm happy for your feedback. The committee did talk quite a bit about SimCom. It was a really hot topic, and knowing that we needed to address it and figuring out how, particularly on our 2 site-based programs, our 2 campuses. So with that policy in place, we were trying to reframe communication. When communication breaks down, is SimCom acceptable, or should we just never, ever use it? Once that policy is set, we are hoping that we will also be able to add some exhibits and scenarios. So if an individual, you approach someone who doesn't know sign language, what do you do? Do you speak first to your hearing colleague and sign second to your deaf colleague, or vice versa? Once that policy is set, we will, I'm sure, discover some scenarios that are challenging. Bottom line is that we want to create and establish this policy to enhance communication access on our campuses in order to ensure that all of our staff, and particularly students, especially those who are learning ASL, have full access wherever they go within our agency. And having that in place is a good reminder for those of us who work here every day. I hope that brings some clarity. Yes, the SimCom issue, again, was a big one, and we did want to indicate that it is not preferred, but in some cases, we have to think about what our daily communication looks like around campus and around deaf communities in general.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Maria. Oh, go ahead.
I would just like to make the comment and to acknowledge the ASDB Language Policy Committee, who did so much research and worked so hard on this. And they were just a pleasure to work with. And we didn't always agree at times. We had some respectful disagreements, but we went back and forth. And I think that we figured out what the good balance is in terms of ensuring access for all of our ASDB employees and our whole community. So I would just like to take this opportunity to publicly acknowledge all of their hard work and to thank them.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to 7.03, discussion and action items, set the calendar for the 2024 regular board meetings and possible work study sessions. I'll give you guys a minute to take a look at this.
This is Linda. So we're looking at this as, this is Linda speaking. Looking at January 11th, 2024 in Tucson. I know that we do make that trip to Tucson, but January is the darkest time of the year, and some of us don't want to drive back when it's that dark. I personally don't drive at night, and so I was hoping that maybe we could flip those and have March 7th in Tucson rather than the January. So in springtime, it's a little bit lighter outside, makes that drive a little bit easier, and I feel a little bit safer doing that. Or unless I can find someone to carpool with and force my husband to come down with me, things like that, you know what I mean?
I'm going to defer to Annette on this. I believe there was a scheduling conflict in one of our buildings.
Oh, okay.
You are correct. March 7th at Tucson's BPAC. They are already reserved.
Oh, I see.
So part of that scheduling was figuring out here in Phoenix and in Tucson when we could have March or May. March and May in BPAC is not available, which means for 2025, we're already booking up for March and May in the BPAC as well. And so we need to start scheduling, it seems, a year and a half in advance for those meetings instead of coming closer to it. In January, we have the WSBC tournament,
which will be happening in Tucson. And so that would coincide with that third week. We will be doing some live streaming of that event, which means that all of our equipment will already be on the Tucson campus. Our media department has asked that the 11th be in Tucson for that reason, so that they can establish the live streaming equipment there, and then the following week we could easily live stream the WSBC competition.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Any other concerns? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve the proposed calendar.
This is Lynn. I move that we accept the proposed calendar.
This is Katie, I second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to 7.04, discussion and action item, election of 2024 board officers.
This is Linda. I would like to make a motion to retain Sue Kay as president and Brittany Brittany as secretary for the 2024 year.
I will assume that's a nomination and I will accept.
I will also assume that's a nomination, and I will also accept.
Okay,
I
wonderful.
second the motion.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Hearing none, I think we retain the board as is. Okay, moving on to 8.01, call to the public for any non-agenda items. We have not received anything, so moving on to 8.02, discussion and possible action items for the next regular board meeting. I just want to mention that as Superintendent Reichman mentioned, we did meet with some current staff who are part of the Education Association, and I would like us to continue those meetings until continue acting on that initial meeting and continue our fact-finding so that we can move forward and bring that to the board meeting at some point in the next calendar year. So that I kind of just would like to sort of be there until we receive the information and can move forward. Anybody else have any agenda items? You can always reach out to me and or executive team here at ASDB before the next meeting. Otherwise, we will move on to 9.01, action item adjournment.
I move that we adjourn this meeting.
This is Katie, I second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. The meeting is now adjourned at 6:18 p.m.